Percy with an early run, he's onside this time! It's 1-1! Andre Schürrle, it's 7! It's Mario Götze! What a goal! What a goal to win a World Cup!
Hello there and welcome to the Beermat World Cup podcast. We have booked in one of the two finalists, and that is the nation of France beating Belgium by 1-0. Immediate post-match, final whistle's just gone thoughts. First half, Belgium have about 15 to 20 minutes of the game. Lloris makes a really good save, and I'm not suggesting that that's the sort of defining point of the game or the turning point, but at some point during that first half, which was frenetic to a point, both of these sides have a lot of pace and both of these sides work really well in the transition, and I think what either England or Croatia are going to have to deal with is this idea of what happens when you lose the ball first of all, but secondly, when you've got the ball, it's speed of thought almost as much as it is talent and where you're putting it and where you're trying to move the French players in and around. And then with that pace, you could see in the first half, as France grew into it, as I said, I think about the 20 to 25 mark, definitely at least a half an hour mark. France had warnings, but they were about to just do what they did in the second half, just to the game. It was like, in boxing, if you're 6 foot tall and you're fighting someone that's significantly smaller than you, and significantly smaller than you can only be a couple of inches, the quality of the respective sides was about a coin flip, but France have more of a history of it. If Belgium, if you question their, bottle mentality, call it whatever you want to. I won't go too harsh into them just yet, but they've got the sort of reach advantage in that they can dwell back into the old memory mines and say, even though these aren't the same players, we're sort of used to this, whereas Belgium aren't. And what they did was, for 2/3 of the game, from half an hour on, was just go to Belgium, we're going to keep you at arm's length, and you may have a knockout punch in De Bruyne or Hazard, but you're not even going to be in a position to place that knockout punch. You've got no shot. And a lot will be dissected from this second half, from the performances of Varane particularly, the whole French defence actually. And of course you've got the big sort of reveal. It's like the curtain's been dropped down, and Mbappe, he's amazing, as people that have actually watched football for the last 2 years will have known. The scary thing about this is that even though we're being sarcastic and sort of going, yeah, of course Mbappe's good, it's the fact that he's good and this young. And I think that's what goes to be said for a lot of this French side, which is like, there's so much there that still has room to improve. And it's not a side that's on its way out. And I know Belgium, the golden generation, they'll get another shot. But this is a side that's in France that's coming into its own. And so if you can get the gold now, as it were, then all the better for it. I mean, you look at that defence, which has got youth stemming all the way through it, and then into that midfield, and they're not exactly fresh new faces that we've not seen before in Kante and Pogba. But to be honest here, if you're a Man United fan, you might not necessarily have seen Pogba play like this. Who knew that what you could do with a player that has actually got some skills in terms of both defending and attacking and setting the play off and passes and all that, that if you actually don't set up completely to lose the game, then he might actually have effect. Kante was what Kante always is. Whenever anyone tried to sort of set anything up, and I do think actually a lot of what I will go on to say about Belgium sort of stems from how well not only the defence played, but the French midfield as well. At no real point did France sort of get pushed back to any great degree, and what Kante allows you to do is whenever there's any sort of attempt at extended pressure on you, he can sort of break that up and make sure that while some sides may get a couple of shots on you, it's not going to last for a really long period of time when sides try to build a real head of steam. And then you look further upfield as well. I mean, I spoke about Mbappe just and how good of a game he had. There were two other attacking players that had very different, some would say poorer games. Giroud is an interesting one actually because he's come in and his role at Chelsea has been very minimal. Some would say, what was even the point going there? But sometimes you just need a fresh start, to be honest with you. And I'm never going to suggest that anyone is better off staying at Arsenal, especially these days. What I did think, though, is that he had these chances and he kept getting them. And yes, he wasn't necessarily Ruud van Nistelrooy-like with his poaching abilities, shall we say. I want to kind of give him credit for getting into these spaces, but I think it's something like he's had so many shots at the minute, but not one on target in the entire tournament. That feels like that's indefensible. There is one instance in the first half where he got a lot of criticism because Mbappe managed to get across, play it in from the right-hand side, and it looked like a simple tap-in and the defender got there. I think the ball in from Mbappe could be better, and God knows you're not allowed to criticise the absolute master of all things that are good, Mbappe, but if he plays it square rather than where he plays it, which is just behind Giroud doesn't have to check his run, and it gives the defender less of a chance to get in. And like I say, I've watched it back again, and there is a corridor there. You could put it in between. If you play further forward, as it were, the goalie's not coming out to get it. There is a space there. So I would say that, like, in that chance in particular, it's not necessarily all on the Chelsea man. I think his contract's already up next year and he's supposedly looking to move again, but we'll see. He's wearing blue for France now. Whether he wears blue domestically for very much longer, we don't know. I'm going to have to move on to... It's funny actually, because normally when you do stuff like this, you try and save the best to last, but I have to save the worst to last in this instance, and we're going to move over to Belgium now. And they have fallen short again, and while it's not necessarily the worst thing you've ever seen in the world, or the worst performance you've ever seen, I would actually, from a Belgian perspective, be relatively angry with that second half performance in particular. First half less so. As I said earlier, first 20, they had chances. I actually thought they were the better side. I thought Eden Hazard in particular, who did have a good game all throughout, but in that first half he was electric, and Pavard was having all sorts of problems. And you wondered whether this sort of momentum could carry along and whether France would actually be found out in this regard. But they adapted very well, and fair play to them. But what Belgium did is they failed to adapt to that. And the longer the game went on, the less you felt like they were going to lay a glove on. I know I've used the boxing analogy already once before, but this was like powder puff stuff. And there's been a lot of praise put in the Belgian camp. And I do get that overall, from a perspective of first time they got to the semis since '86, first time this sort of side has clicked in a big way, because even when they got to the quarters last time around, it never really looked like clicking, to be honest. When Tim Howard is making all sorts of saves, and you know you've definitely done something wrong. But so I'll give them credit for overall tournament, but that second half, France go 1-0 up. It's from a set piece. For all the danger that Mbappe caused and the chances that they created in and around what he was doing, France's goal comes from a set piece, which that's check mark number one against you. Shouldn't really be happening. It does happen. I'm not going to go too hard in that regard. But then, so if you're telling me that France, in spite of how great they were, don't really go forward again with any great deal of conviction for the rest of the game, why don't you then at least attempt to put the pressure on with half an hour to go, with 10 minutes to go? There was never a sense of throwing the kitchen sink. There was never a sense of, do you know what, we could lose this 2 or 3, but we may as well try. Dries Mertens comes on in the second half, and I'm thinking, do you know what, this guy for Napoli, I have seen on many an occasion just absolutely take the piss at times. So first of all, the idea that you can bring that level of quality off the bench is a good thing. Whether you should be starting with him or not, I don't know. That's Martinez's call. But he does nothing. We talk about before, like, how the golden generation of England had this weight on players' shoulders, and how really, really good players domestically weren't able to perform on the international stage. And I'm looking around the Belgian squads, and I'm going to have to say, in this instance, not as a whole in the tournament, but in this game, you failed to perform individually. Martinez, could argue, got it wrong. Doesn't necessarily do anything to react to France getting the upper hand. Lukaku wasn't great. I was really expecting something big from him today. I'm not like, he's not the worst player of all time, but just a 6 out of 10 performance when you need your side to get a goal is not great. Didn't get service at all, so it's not all on him. The whole thing was a bit sort of underwhelming. Hazard, as I say, is the only one that comes out of this with any real credit. De Bruyne as well. I'm looking at some of the balls he was playing in isolation. Fantastic. There was one specifically to Lukaku that was so close to being perfection, but just couldn't quite. It's a matter of inches. If that pass connects and Lukaku buries it, then all of a sudden I'm saying something very different about the both of them and potentially about the Belgian side in general. But as it was, they fall short, and not short in a way that you would say is particularly heroic. And this whole idea of like falling down on your sword and being the sort of, oh, we lost, but we put up a brave fight. There is an element of patronising about that, but you can't tell me this Belgium side will look back at this in 2-3 years' time and go, that was a fair reflection of our quality. That was a fair reflection of us versus France. I really don't see it that way. They'll be frustrated. They will look at this as a missed opportunity, in spite of France may very well go on to win this World Cup. France may very well go on to win this one and the Euros and the next one after. That's how good the potential for this France side are. I would argue the manager and the coaching staff of the French side would need to improve for that to be the case. But still, Belgium will still look back at this and go, doesn't matter what happens to France now. Doesn't matter how good Mbappe is. We missed a big opportunity there. And that will not haunt them necessarily, but just sort of stick in the craw. And it's also a very valuable lesson for both Croatia and England tomorrow. Leave it all out on the pitch, because the whole idea of you're never going to get a better chance means that you will forever regret it. You are, as much as you're etched in history, if you take that chance, you will forever be ruining what could have been if you don't. And in that regard, I'm going to have to go get my head down and prepare for a World Cup semi-final featuring England. Now, there are certain phrases and certain sentences I thought I would utter. And on a scale of likelihood, I can't believe the media is still having a go at Sterling, is like 10 out of 10. That's very likely. This one was not likely at all. So who knew? We could still get both, actually, technically, if he turns out to be the fall guy tomorrow. But we'll see. I've got to rest up for that. We'll catch you tomorrow. This has been the Beermat World Cup podcast. Thank you for listening. Catch you tomorrow.